We have a great program for you. This is really what a film festival is all about. We have some distinguished guests in the house. First of all, let me bring up the director, Marissa Aroy. Wanted to have a conversation about 1965. You saw him there as a young agitator, really riling up the troops. But as Gary Singh said in the Metro, the legendary Luis Valdez. And I have not met him yet, but you all heard from him in the film. This is Johnny Itliong, Larry Itliong's son. And finally, let me bring up the moderator for this panel. He's a member of the core committee for this film festival, Mr. Ron Muriera from the Filipino National Society. Thank you, Ron. So just before we get started, I think Christine Padilla from Anna Eshu's office has a few things to say. You want to come up, Christine?
Hi, good evening. I'm Christine Padilla, and I'm here on behalf of Congresswoman Anna Eshu. That was amazing. On behalf of the I'll juggle here. On behalf of the Congresswoman, we wanted to present these certificates of special congressional recognition in recognition of outstanding and invaluable service to the community. And of course, one for Marissa Aroy. Luis Valdez. J-Town Film Festival. Congratulations on the first year, and we're looking forward to many more years to come. So
please thank Congresswoman Eshu for the recognition. You know, it's just a pleasure to be able to be here this evening and to be a part of the planning of this first ever J-Town Film Festival. Like I said, it's through the commitment and passion of our community that has brought us all here on this opening night. And every time I've seen this film several times already, I still get choked up. Every time I see this film, it has such resonance with me because a lot of my uncles, of course, are manongs, and who also made a lot of those treks throughout the valley in Alaska and worked in the cannery. So for me, it's also personal. But I'm just so pleased to be able to be the moderator for this conversation with Marissa Aroy, with Luis Valdez, and Johnny Itliong. And you see, I am representing. I'm wearing my Larry Itliong T-shirt. Larry's here. So we're going to begin and just have a conversation with folks up here, but we will have an opportunity to turn it over to some folks in the audience, because I know that you have also a lot of questions that you'd like to ask. So we'll start with Marissa. It's amazing what it is, a short film, which actually holds the attention of students when you do show this, in universities and colleges. But what prompted you to actually make the film about the DELANO Manongs?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It was actually making another film about the Filipino farm workers as they were in Stockton. It was called Little Manila, and it was really that was the impetus for talking about the Larry Itliong story. Because Larry began a lot of his agricultural organizing there in Stockton with the asparagus workers, and a lot of the Filipinos were asparagus workers as well. And somebody said to me, "Oh, do you know that the Filipinos are involved with the UFW?" And that's where I found out about Larry being involved with the UFW. And that was right in my backyard. I grew up in Bakersfield, California, and my grandma and grandpa are from Delano, and I knew the Manongs. I didn't know, I knew that they weren't family members, but you always just called them uncle. And they would give me money on my birthday and Christmas. But I didn't know anything else about them. And so it was really, somebody had to prompt me telling the story and looking further at it. And then going to the community and asking for archival materials and everything, and learning more about the story from that.
How long did it take you to basically get this documentary made?
It's been a number of years. So I began working on it in 2008. And when I say working on it, it was something that like slowly happened. And you have to do research, you have to find archival materials, you have to talk to people who are in the movement, you have to see who's still alive. And unfortunately, and all the Manongs have passed away. So it's really the next generation, finding Johnny. Actually, Johnny and I connected over YouTube. He commented on the trailer when we were fundraising, and that's how we were able to get in touch. So it's just been a lot of years of researching, and then you saw all the funder names there. So it was a whole village that it took to make this film.
Matter of fact, I was going, wow, look at all the names here. And I remember when we did start talking about the fundraising, part of that is that it took so many people across so many different communities when they heard that this story was going to be made, and they said they would love to give, and just the outpouring of generosity of people wanting to like contribute whatever they could to have a film made.
Well, Filipinos don't have a lot of documentaries made about them, or stories told about them. And we're sort of an invisible group here in the United States, and we're the second largest Asian American group, but nobody knows about us. And so I think people were really hungry in the community to be able to support us in telling the story.
Now, Luis, you said, I mean, this is the first time for you to have seen the film, correct? So I want to kind of get your feedback in terms of what you thought about the film, seeing your younger self in the film. You still look the same, man. You've earned your colors. Thank you. So, what are your feelings after having seen the film?
Well, I want to congratulate Marissa. It's a very moving documentary. Personally, for me, I mean, my eyes started to water, quite frankly, because I knew all these strikers and all those faces. Took me back immediately to Delano, and I remember that time so vividly. And for one thing, let me explain, I was born in Delano. I was born in Chinatown, in a farm labor camp. The reason it's called Chinatown, and Richard Chavez question doesn't know why it's called Chinatown. It's called Chinatown because the railroad was being built by Chinese workers in 1873. And then there was a depression during the government, President Grant, and they stopped. They just laid off all the Chinese workers and left them there in the southern San Joaquin Valley, which was a desert. And they had no place to go, no way to get home, no anything. So they camped out by the railroad waiting for the work to begin again, and a cholera epidemic came in, and many of them died. They were buried there by the railroad. That was the beginning of Chinatown. Chinatown was the first part of Delano. Delano turned into a stop at the end of the line, so the farmers would bring their produce to Delano, and a town developed before Bakersfield, before it got to Bakersfield. So it was named Delano because the Minister of Interior, that was Columbus Delano, was the uncle of FDR, of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And so it was Delano named in his honor. I didn't know this until later, but it's interesting, all this history, that the Asian workers have been used in the history of California since before the days of the gold rush, but certainly from the gold rush on into the railroad, the building of the railroads, the development of agriculture in the Santa Clara Valley. It's Asians, Chinese, Japanese, Filipinos, totally fundamental to the development of agriculture and our whole society here in California. And then, of course, the Mexicans later. This used to be Mexico, so I mean, we were around. We were around. But the thing is that I've always admired these workers that I met in Delano. They were older, no question about it. I admired Larry Itliong a great deal. I'll never forget, and it's true, the United Farmworkers under the leadership of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta was not ready to go on strike in 1965. They just didn't have the resources. So one of the things that happened is that in order for us to just hold a strike, we had to develop a farm labor camp outside of Delano into our strike camp. And it was a muddy block. It started to rain, and it was just a mess to get in there. And we had a tiny little kitchen. You saw some shots of people being served in that kitchen. And there wasn't enough room for everybody to eat. People had to go outside to eat. And we were cold, and there wasn't enough food. People were bringing in truck caravans with food to feed the strikers. And we were freezing our butts off, really. It was one thing to be out on the picket line, but to come home back to Delano and have no place to hang was really terrible. And Larry Itliong came to Caesar and opened the doors of Filipino Hall. And we found shelter there. It was warm. They had a strike kitchen, and we all then began to eat there. And you know, sometimes just fish heads and rice, you know, which took some doing, you know, for some of us. There was always a big jar of peanut butter, you know, on the table with some bread if you wanted that, you know. But the fact is that it was the first time in the history of Delano that two minority groups, Mexicans and Filipinos, had come together out of sheer necessity, of sheer support. And of course, we learned a lot about each other. There were problems, there's no question about it. But I got to admire Larry Itliong as the leader of the Manong, and Philip Cruz. I got very close to Philip. Philip was a personal friend of mine, and we went through a lot. And Pete Velasco and Andy Imutan, you see him as a young man, as an old man, his wife Looming. I even got to know Ben Dines, you know, who turned against the Union early on. These are all leaders that were there. They were there, and they were leading the Filipino workers. And the Filipino workers were fearless, I'm telling you. They were heroic. And I so much appreciate this documentary because you're telling a story that needs to be told. And as we move down the line, I hope we can tell more of that story. Okay.
You had mentioned Johnny, and I also want to acknowledge that Johnny's family is here as well. So thank you so much for being here. You guys consider yourself a film? Because I heard one, hey, Dad, so you were how old when you observed some of the? I heard you mention 5 years old when you started to see some of the violence being perpetrated.
Yeah, I was 5 years old when I actually started working out in the fields. I am the product of the Grape Strike, the Delano Grape Strike. I was born in 1965. So that's my fault. No, I was born in 1965, and I like I said, I started working in the grape fields at 5 years old, and was a witness to many things that happened out in the fields, including a lot of the racism and the brutality that the farm growers and especially the foremen, because those were the guys that were in the fields and directing all the laborers of what to do and how to do it. And of course, you know, we right here, of course, we were out there physically working the fields. You know, it was pretty brutal, pretty racist, and you know, even then it was 1970, and to even get a break, to even use the bathroom, and you know, you just go out in the fields, right between the branches, and you know, it was just very not good conditions, even during that time. So.
And how old were you until, you know, where you continued to work in the fields?
I worked in the fields until I was probably about 16 years old. And I worked before and after school. So.
And then when you reached 16?
Oh, I'm sorry, no, 14.
14,
because that's when I finally decided to get out of the fields and get into the kitchen. And I've been a chef for over 30 years now.
Chef Johnny Itliong, by the way. And so, you know, I want to also have folks understand in terms of like the history. You know, the documentary just starts to bring an awareness, you know, of the history and the narrative. And for many of us, a lot of us were involved in you know, following the history of the Filipinos and the Mexicanos during that time, you know, wherever. But you know, we run into a lot of folks who, first off, do not know. That's why I wear this shirt with pride who Larry Itliong is. I always find it, an opportunity to educate, because most people know Cesar Chavez. And so one just get a sense of what the reality was during that time, because, of course, we're living now in times where we still have those struggles with regards to labor and equity. But I'm sure even back then was more challenging for fighting for decent wages and equity.
Well, personally, I think it's about the same. What the struggle on the field is now as it was back then. We're just more technologically advanced, and with that, we have Monsanto and the glyphosates out in the fields, and that was one of the biggest things about that my father really feared was the chemicals in the fields and the food, and and it looks like now we're actually winning our fight against Monsanto, because they are really starting to feel the effects of people educating themselves or getting educated about chemicals.
I don't know, I'm sure that some of you have read Carlos Bulosan's America's in the Heart. It's a classic work of labor history. Carlos Bulosan was a Filipino who came to Seattle first, the West Coast, in 1930. 1929, I think he set out. But he tells a bit of his history at the beginning of the book, which is wonderful, because he lived in a village with a very poor family, and the Philippines were already expropriated. They were already pretty much divided. There was nowhere for people to really develop. And just for people to go to school, the whole family had to sacrifice. So he virtually came to the United States as a manang to work so that his brother could go to high school back in the Philippines. And a lot of these manang were supporting families back in the Philippines, because there was no other way to get money to them. And it's a story of labor history that goes all the way back to the beginnings of the century, and violence and racism that existed. Bulosan mentions, he says, to be Filipino in America is to be a criminal. That's what he wrote. And that really got to me, because I think the criminalization of the minorities, non-white minorities, has been an ongoing process that has kept a lot of people down the totem pole, right? It's in the barrios and in the fields and in dishwashing, plucking chicken, whatever they do, because they've been criminalized. And if they're not in prison, they're in low-paying jobs. And that's just the history of agriculture and the history of employment in America. We're trying to change it, but there are still many things to be changed, right? But I do appreciate that Carlos Bulosan wrote that book back in the 1930s. He died young. He had medical problems, but it's a wonderful book. He had to educate himself. He had to teach himself how to write. So it's America in the Heart. It's name of the book, America's in the Heart. I recommend it to all of you. But that idea then of labor struggle is something that we encountered directly in Delano. And I was aware of Filipinos early on from my childhood. I'm part of a migrant farm working family that would come from Delano to the Santa Clara Valley every year, every summer. So San Jose is also my hometown in that sense. We worked in the apricots, the prunes, the tomatoes, the cherries, everything. We picked everything here. And then we go back to the valley and pick cotton, and then up down the San Joaquin Valley. So I knew who was out there, and many farm workers used to see each other. I'm talking about the 40s and the 50s. And what was always evident was that there was racism as a factor. You actually see it. Bruno Despodo, was one of the more vicious. It's a wonderful theatrical name. I loved it. Bruno Despodo, what a great name for a grower, But he was fairly arrogant, and he forgot his workers' names. You see that. There was a lot of condescension. There was a lot of paternalism among the growers. The growers themselves were immigrants. They were the children of Yugoslavs. A lot of Yugoslavs were out there, a lot of Italians, And the thing is that once they got out there to the fields, they put on the cowboy hat, put on the Texas, Tony Lama boots. They got the big belt. They're in their pickup trucks, with the shotgun in the window. And suddenly they're all John Wayne, they're all cowboys. And they like to have little brown men to control. They're the Indians, you know what I mean? So, boy, get over here. So when I started at Teatro Campesino, the Farm Workers Theater, that was one of the first things we went to, is to criticize, is to satirize that, because that's what was happening. And Teatro Campesino was born on the picket lines of the Delano Grape Strike, the Farm Workers Theater, my company, which is now celebrating its 50th anniversary. Filipinos. A lot of people don't know that. Conrado Villamayor, Rudy Reyes, they were actors with us in Delano, in that Filipino hall. That was the first stage we ever had. We didn't have a stage before that. So it changed the nature of our performances. We went from 1 or 2 man actors, which we used to do on top of cars in the fields, to be able to do 4 or 5 people actors, you know, and all in Filipino hall, and it was bilingual because we had to speak English and Spanish so that everybody could understand. So it shaped us. That hall really shaped us. But we were addressing this painful reality that California agriculture was built on the backs of poor people, and the Manong, the tragedy of the Manong, is something that is doubled and tripled because these were men that were not allowed to marry. They were not allowed to marry white women. And you know, the Philippines became a protectorate of the United States in 1903 because of the Platt Amendment, the Teddy Roosevelt administration. They took over the Philippines, they took over the Puerto Rico and the Philippines at the same time. And so it was talk softly and carry a big stick, that was Teddy Roosevelt, but they turned the Philippines into a colony. The Philippines under General Aguinaldo and under Jose Rizal had been fighting for their independence, and the Americans came, let me help you. I'll help you win your independence. And so they helped them. They helped themselves, all right. They helped themselves to the Philippines, is what they did. And that drove the people that were living there, the natives, and to the lowest rungs of the Filipino society, you know, so, which exists to this day. It's a struggle. I'm not going to. I've been to the Philippines. I'll tell you about that. I've been to the Philippines.
I just fell more in love with Luis. You were the first non-Filipino I've ever heard talk about Carlos Bulosan that way. Talk about reading American culture, our history. It's very moving to be recognized by you and our history to be recognized by you. Wow.
I know, I'm getting a little verklempt myself too. But it just goes to show you, in terms of the commonality that we have, you know, again, you know, I've always, and that's why I always appreciate and feel blessed to be a part of the Filipino American National Historical Society, because it's not just about sharing and educating all communities about the contributions of Filipino Americans, but the collaboration, the partnerships that we have, foremost almost with Mexicanos, because, and I always share my personal story because my wife is Chicana, is Mexicana, so I have Mexicanos, Mexicanas for my children. You know, hopefully goes to Italy. You'll get tacos, which you're going to have later on this evening, if you're joining us for the music event. But it is always, you know, and that's why I so, you know, appreciate and admire Luis so much too, because he knows the history of the Philippines. He knows the history of Filipinos. And that's what we need to do. We need to understand all our common histories and how we are all involved, you know, and connected with each other. And that's, you know, our communities of color and all the people who are and I want to mention, because we're gonna be cut off soon, because I've been informed in terms of how much time, because I want to give some time for audience questions, that Delano Manongs has been nominated for a California Emmy Award. So congratulations. And if you've been following, because May is Asian American Pacific American Heritage Month, Delano Manongs, as well as some other Filipino-American films, such as Harana, the movie, and Jeepney and some other ones, have been playing on the national PBS stations, telling the Filipino history and the Filipino-American stories. So, you know, it's great that this film has been now, you know, broadened the history and awareness of many people nationwide. So what I'd like to do is I want to turn it over to the audience, because I know you're chomping at the bit. You want to ask some questions of Marissa, of Johnny, of Luis, with regards to their experience in the film. So I'll take whoever raises their hand first in terms of any questions that you would like to ask our esteemed panels. Yes, gentleman in the back there.
Bring up the
you have the mobile mic, so we could. Yeah. After the show,
my name is Miguel Mike Correa. I was born and raised in, lived in Soledad. I was born in 1944, born in Salinas, and I remember a lot of what was going on in that area. I remember working with the Filipinos in the field, short animal home. I still have short animal homes at home. I remember at Major's Camp, which was Hardin Ranch in Soledad, where the Filipino could not go into town. He could not get married. But to me, the Filipino was always the engineer of the fields. He irrigated the fields for the cornucopia that we eat. Another thing that touched me about the movie was that miscegenation. I'm a Vietnam era veteran, served overseas, but before I came back, I got married in the Philippines, 1967, but before I left the Philippines, I had to sign a miscegenation form that if you get stationed in the Jim Crow states, it is against, because I was considered white. But guess what? I'm a Mexicano, but I'm a Chicano Mexicano. And being an American first, that gives me the right to respect my heritage, which is Mexico. But I was neither a Mexicano nor Mexicano, but I was a Chicano Mexicano Americano. And the Filipino comes with me is that they were always looked at. And one of the things, working in the field with him, but I remember his name was Angel Ventura. I think it was in the 3rd grade. He would always go to me. Psst, psst. Filipinos are known for that. But no, but I married a Filipina. She died from thyroid cancer from the poison they treated it. But can you imagine? They told me you're going to end up with a tube in your throat and on your side. 40 years later, guess who got it? My esposa, Erlinda, with them. I get emotional about it, but that's what happened. She got the thyroid cancer. She died within 5 months. So that's what I feel. I am married in heart with the Filipinos in more ways than people might think. That's what I am for. Without the Filipinos, there would have been no Cesar. I'm sorry. And like I'm a Chicano, but like I said, I love the Filipinos because they are my family. They are my brothers. We are all one family. We are a cornucopia, the gente. So, again, the Filipinos right home.
Thank you so much. I can play the first time. Yes, okay, let me run over here. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Marissa, was there any content, I know it's 30 minutes, but is there any content that you weren't able to put into this documentary that you wanted to?
Oh, there's plenty of content. There's probably, there's probably enough for, another 3 documentaries, to be honest. But the issue is, how much of the documentary can you give to people where they feel like they want more and they're interested in the history afterwards, versus telling them too much and then having their minds turn off. So it's 30 minutes because I want teachers to be able to use this in a classroom and have a discussion, and also I want to give enough of it so that you want to research more, want to learn more about the history. And so yeah, there's still stuff that, there's a lot of interviews with Larry Itliong where he tells amazing stories about how he started to become a farm worker, how he came here to the U.S., the woman he left behind, the women he left behind in the Philippines, stuff like that. And so I think maybe some of that should be in written material instead. But yeah, hopefully we'll be able to get that stuff out to people so they can use it as resources.
Thank you for that question. Thank you, Marissa. Because we figured that there is a lot of other source material that you couldn't include in there, but just a wealth of material that's available. Do like DELANO MANONGS Part 1, 2, 3, 4. Other questions? Back here. Oh, back? Okay, let me go run you. I feel like I'm going to date myself. I feel like Phil Donahue. Yes. Can you work? Thank you. Thank you very much, Marissa, for the film. I got to catch it in Philadelphia just this past year, actually.
The Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival.
Yeah. So that was awesome to see it there, even though it already played here. Question to all of you. It's great that the mention of the Arpayani village was brought up in the film, because that's very important, and that's where I actually was able to meet Brother Johnny. Can any of you talk a little bit about that, because it's still there, and that's one place that I know students, college students, and people who are concerned about that history go and visit and check out. Can you talk a little bit about that history, or where it's at now? That'd be awesome if you could share that with us.
Well, the Manong have passed away, you know, the ones they were built. It remains a tribute to them. I'm sure the union is trying to find some way to continue its original use. Certainly the acknowledgement, I think, of Filipinos in Delano and throughout the state of California, the whole West Coast, I think is an ongoing cause that it's worth fighting for, and continuing to use it as a means of educating people. A lot of people don't realize how important Filipinos are in America. And I'm here to testify to that fact, not just as a Chicano, but also as an American. When Columbus left, when Columbus came to America, in search of America, he was trying to get to China. He was trying to get to the silk and porcelain of China. He never made it. He got as far as the Dominican Republic, Hispaniola. And then Cortez got to Mexico and others. Magellan finally sailed around the South America and up into the Philippines and made it all the way into Southeast Asia. And he discovered that the Philippines existed. You know, in 1971, I was invited to go to Manila for the first Third World Congress of the Theater. It was put together by the International Theater Institute. The theater was 6 years old, and people knew about my work with the farm workers, so I was invited under the auspices of the United Nations to go. So I went as a representative of the United States with a number of other notable theater people. But I found myself in the Philippines, a land where the street signs are in 3 languages. They're in Spanish, English, Tagalog, or Ilocano, one of the 2. It was amazing. It was multicultural. I saw the Intramuro, which was the original wall built by the Spanish in 1571. Okay? And outside the Intramuro was a great big mall, a marketplace called the Parian, where silk and porcelain was traded and shipped off to America through the Spanish galleons. And the people sailing and sometimes building those galleons were the Filipinos. They were the first Asians to come to America. And they settled in Mexico. Many of them, waves of them, settled in Veracruz and into Mexico City. Some even made it to Acapulco, Mexico City, Veracruz, and from Veracruz all the way to New Orleans. In the 19th century they were there, Filipinos. And the fact is that they were the beginning of globalization. Filipinos were part of the globalization of the planet, part of the galleon trade. And so with it came warriors, came businessmen, came beauties, came all kinds of talents that people don't know about. They don't know. And many of them are Mexicans because they settled in Mexico. And so our links with the Philippines it goes back centuries and centuries and centuries, like our links with Africa go back centuries, but people don't know about that. But I think that it's really important that the Manong be acknowledged for their contributions, but they were not the only ones. They were part of a whole tradition that had been going on for several centuries. And so in that sense, this is an untold story. What Marissa has done is incredible. I salute her for it. I think it's beautiful. But I encourage her. She's young and beautiful and ready to go. I encourage her to continue to make films that explore the history of America through this lens. It's very, very important.
I just want to say something. You know, when Magellan discovered, you know, what did they discover? We were here, right? The Philippines was there. The American Indians were here. And that's something that I want to point out. You know, with this discovery of people who had been there on their lands and living for how many centuries of years, you know.
We have time for one more question because I've been told that we have the second part of the event. Well, I have one more here, and then we're going to have to close it. So, sir?
In the summer of '65, I was 15 years old. My mother approached me and asked me if I wanted to make some money. I had just completed my freshman year. And I said, sure, I'll make some money. What do I have to do? He said, you'll have to go to Delano and pick grapes with your uncle. And I'm from the San Jose area. I had never heard of Delano. And I didn't know what picking grapes was all about. So I went with my uncle to Delano. We ended up at a camp called Caratan. It was right off Panama Street, I believe. And we went to a meeting one day, and I recall seeing Mr. Chavez, Mr. Itliong, and Mr. Cruz. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was history being made, and I was just listening to all that was happening. I knew that was something important. And it was really hard work, but I did have fun out there, and I even went back 2 more consecutive summers because I enjoyed doing it, even though it was hard work and it was hot. And another time I remember the Teamsters Union. They had members that would come out to the fields and try to disrupt the organization of the farmworkers. And there was also another weekend, they hosted some kind of festival or picnic. And they encouraged all the farmworkers to come out there. I didn't know it at the time, but they represented the team workers, Teamsters. And so they said that's a no-no. Don't listen to what they have to say. And so those were my memories. And I had to come to this film. I heard about it, and I came to Japan.
Yes.
We have one more question, and then I really have to wrap up because I'm getting a signal from...
Ron, I wanted to make a couple of footnotes.
Sure, go ahead.
One thing that I forgot to mention, but again, it's for people to know. In Montreal, which was the union's newspaper, was very aware of representing the Filipinos. Andy Cermeño was a cartoonist for... He invented Don Sotaco and Don Coyote and all these caricatures that were published in the Union newspaper. Well, he created a character called Juan de la Cruz, which was Filipino. He was a cartoon character. And this is part of the archives of the Union. They're at Wayne State University, I believe. But there was a whole series of this Filipino character, very heroic and confronting. And there was an effort of the Union to try to break through, this misunderstanding and this division that was starting to develop, unfortunately, in the Union. But the Teatro Campesino, as I say, had members, but one of the things that we did, Augie Lina was our main composer at the beginning, one of the co-founders of the Teatro Campesino, and he looked very Filipino himself, actually, Augie. But the thing is, he was from Torreon, Coahuila. The thing is that he learned, because he was a wonderful musician, he learned a song from the Filipino workers called Dahil Sayo, which he used, which means because of you. And it was such a wonderful experience that night in Filipino Hall. It was just absolutely silent. The workers were just sitting there, reveling in his rendition of Dahil Sayo. I guess it's in Tagalog or Ilocano or something, right? I mean, it's in one of the dialects, but I mean, it was like a gift, that Augie gave to the workers. Just 2 points.
So, first of all, thank you, Marissa, so much for your beautiful film, and thank you, Johnny, for coming here to share with us your beautiful family's legacy and history. And prior to seeing your film, Marissa, I knew that the Filipino farmworkers were a big role in the UFW, but I didn't know how instrumental they were really to all of the gains that were made by the movement. And I also didn't know about the inner dynamic, right? About how it was that they lost out and how it was that this group of people who ignited this movement were left out of it, and that solidarity really wasn't solidarity in the end. And I'm wondering, as you were making this film and uncovering these things, like what, from your perspective, was the lesson in all of that? So I just wanted to hear, what do you see are the lessons of this history, especially as we now as a nation, we need racial solidarity more than ever with everything that's going on. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I didn't want to do was romanticize the fact that the Chicanos and the Filipinos came together for the Union. I mean, it is the big takeaway out of it, is that they did come together. Now, were there complications? Yes. If you get married to somebody, is it going to be a perfect union? got out of the union, okay? And it's not just because of the hiring halls. There are many factors. They're also an aging group. So there weren't as many of the union members by that time. But the big takeaway that I think I want people to get out of the film is, I have a word, there's a Filipino word called bayanihan, and it means community, or as I know it. I'm not a fluent Tagalog speaker, but bayanihan is always used as the spirit about community. And I just read in this book written by Luis Valdez that bayanihan actually has its origins in labor. And it's about the community coming together and being synchronous with their labor. And being able to create something as beautiful as huge steps in the mountains to create rice terraces. And that is what the bayanihan spirit can do. It can move mountains. And I think that's what I want people to take away from the film, is that this bayanihan spirit was planted, and we have to continue to nurture it.
So on that note, first off, just want to let everyone know that Assemblymember Rob Bonta, the first Filipino-American in the California legislature, has sponsored and is pushing Assembly Bill 7 to officially declare, what's the date of your dad's birthday? October 25th, as Larry Itliong Day in the state of California. So, it's currently,
it's past the Assembly, and the next step is to go to the Senate, and I was just there the other day. It looks like it's going to go good. And one of the other things that is not known is that Larry was the first Filipino delegate to Governor Jerry Brown when he first ran. So, you know, and after the Senate it goes to Jerry Brown, so if he doesn't sign it, you know.
So please join me in thanking Marissa Aroy, Luis Valdez, Larry Itliong, for being here this afternoon, or this evening now. I want to thank all of you for joining us for this film.
I have one more thing we have to do, and it's called the Unity Clap.
Yes. Right.